recording. I'm just going to record it on my computer and then upload it onto YouTube afterwards.
Okay, Scott. Tell me 30 seconds who the fuck you are.
Well, I'm actually an extension of the universe. I'm not really me. I'm actually you. And I am he is you, or he is you, or me, and we are all together.
You know, I hate new age drivel. You hit me with more of that, you're going to get more profanity.
More profanity? Good, good. I like your attitude.
Seriously, I live in Santa Fe where like 1 in 3 people are totally enlightened. 1 in 7 can levitate.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
So you got a lot of like Chris Angel style street performers?
You know, Santa Fe is on a background of a socioeconomic profile that matches Mississippi and Arkansas.
Really?
Yeah. It's a really poor state, but there's a lot of very wealthy people who skew the income basis. But it's heavily Latino. Hey, it was a Spanish colony until the American imperialist war.
Right.
And there's still very powerful, indigenous, Native American, whatever you want to call them, Indians here, who, because this land was so worthless, were never moved off their land. So we've got mainly Pueblo. They're really the powerhouse. But we also have some Navajo and Apache.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what are they out there teaching, like ancient Indian mysticism or something?
No.
Then how come people are levitating and you hate new age bullshit?
Because Santa Fe also attracts every spiritual and BS cult, known to the universe. So for a town of 75,000 people, which is probably a suburb where you're from,
right?
That's the city of Santa Fe, and the county is 200,000. No, these fucking Pueblo Indians are like real.
I got you. And you got the hippies out there trying to, like, I don't know, catch that wave off of them or something.
You want me to give you a hippies 101 lecture, you young punk?
Fuck yeah.
Okay. Because let's get back to basics. Did you read any of the material I sent you?
I didn't know that you sent me material.
You fucking lazy ass swine.
You sound like Hunter S. Thompson right now.
Well, he's one of my heroes. I hope he's one of yours.
He is one of my heroes.
The best adjective insult that was ever leveled at Biosphere 2 was that it was gonzo ecology.
Gonzo ecology. That's a wonderful insult.
Anyway.
I missed all these attachments that you sent me. Lazy swine. Piece of shit.
Lazy swine that you are. I've had another radio host tell me, I don't read your material because that would make me too informed about the subject before we talk.
No, that's ignorant.
Well, you're, I don't know, lazy.
I just missed it. I missed it,
Sent me an email saying, thanks for all of the background material.
That's great. I'm going to check out these links when I get back from my show. I got drunk. I was fucked up at a comedy show when I read that. Oh, I'm an asshole. I'm sorry, Mark. I guess now we got to do 2 podcasts, one after I read all this information. This one's just for fun. This is the warm-up podcast.
All right. I'm a glutton for punishment. Now, how many listeners do you have, Scott?
I range anywhere from like 100 to 1,000.
All right, that's acceptable. I've given talks with less than 50 people.
Okay. Well, right now it's just you and me. Nobody else is listening right now.
Well, we can assume that. But anyway, when you come out there and there's like 39 people in the audience, it's like, well, what do you do? What would you do, Scott?
If there was 39 people in the audience, I would do my act. I've been doing shows with 6 people in the audience.
Okay, so you didn't answer my question. Did you see Spaceship Earth?
No, I thought that comes out in 2021.
Well, that's how much fucking homework you do.
I
It
just
was
watched the trailer for it, and it said 2021.
No, it did not say that. It released May 8th in the U.S.
Sir. Look.
Anyway, so fortunately,
Look, it's literally still on my phone right now. 2020 Earth, 2021. See?
no, that's fucking the Disney attraction at Epcot, you fucking moron. You need to put in Spaceship Earth film. It's already been released in Europe. All right, Scott. Well, I'm clearly not intimidated by you.
I wasn't trying to inseminate you, Mark. What the fuck, man?
I mean, by the way, since you know probably nothing about Biosphere 2, how productive is this interview podcast going to be?
It's already hilarious. What are you talking about?
Oh, you've been recording?
Yeah, I've been recording.
All right. You're supposed to tell me that. You swine. Do I care? At this stage, I don't care. You know, I'm used to, you talk about NBC News during Biosphere 2's time, and I encourage you to do some background reading, even if it's misinformed on Google. We would get these science reporters from major, especially U.S. Channels. Channels?
Yeah.
That's what they used to be called before the internet. And, you know, one guy, I'm not going to name his name, from ABC News said, you know, I'm the science correspondent for ABC National News. And we said, well, what's your background? And he said, astrophysics. I said, you know, Biosphere 2 is interesting on a lot of levels, but it has asymptotic to nothing to do with astrophysics. And he said, that's fine. Let's continue. The interview, that is.
Yeah.
So I kind of feel like, Scott, we're at that level here, except probably you're a comedian.
I told you I was a comedian. You knew I was a snake. Like, come on.
Hey, I'm 1/3 a theater person. Being a comedian is a redeeming feature. That you're spouting new age drivel at me is a demeaning feature.
Well, you asked me who I am, and like that's such a broad question. I don't know who I was before I was Scott.
You know, Scott, have you ever heard of introspection, meditation?
I sure have.
You know, instead of hitting, let's give answer D, which is I am you and you are me and we are all the walrus. You know, okay, cool. Well, let's proceed. You don't mind that I just finished about 8 hours of organic farming.
So is that Chivas Regal?
I'm having my afternoon libation, which will be unnamed. Aside from there's ice in it.
Okay, it looks good. Hey, you're welcome to your libations. I took a toke before we started, so.
All right.
So this is not a professional setting.
I'm sure you have a medicinal card where are you, in Virginia?
In Virginia, yeah.
Do they have medicinal cards?
I was toking clove cigarettes, actually, before we started.
Right. Totally. I totally get that.
Totally, man. Far out.
Right. Okay, so.
How did you get wrapped up in how did you meet the theater troupe?
Before we don't do this.
Yes, Life
Under
Glass.
The reason that I have consented to be on this very funny and pretty engaging specimen of a younger generation, I am very proud that me and my two co-conspirator biospherians from Biosphere 2 have re-updated Life Under Glass, Crucial Lessons in Planetary Stewardship, which is a distillation of what we learned in Biosphere 2, these many years ago when you and many of your listeners may not have been born. All right. So
91 was the year I was born, so.
Oh, yeah. So there you were. After September?
Yep, November 23rd.
Well, you were 2 months old when we were 2 months inside our 2-year closure experiment.
Nice.
Well, I mean, do you need to do background reading?
I did some reading. That's how I found out about Biosphere. God, Uncle Mark, you're an asshole. I'm not even inviting you to Thanksgiving this year.
Unless we do social distancing, it's out in your backyard. I'm not coming anyway.
I live in a sunroom, so.
Oh, cool.
I'm just glad that you told everybody that you consented to this podcast. That's important.
Oh, okay. For the record, without a subpoena, without federal marshals at the door, I consented because, and I think it's true, Scott. You're a fairly cool guy. I bet you do a great comedy act. I consented to be on this podcast. Why? Because even though it was a long time ago, I think Biosphere 2 is really, really a landmark experiment that only becomes more relevant as we continue to recklessly endanger our biosphere.
Yeah.
And it's an amazingly cool story with so many different aspects.
Yeah, exactly. There's a lot of social aspects to the story that I think that really interested me.
You mean how 8 people didn't kill each other or cannibalize one of each other?
Yeah.
We had discussions about that.
Did you?
For listeners who don't know anything about Biosphere 2, and I don't include my host, one of the interesting things that happened, because we tried to persist for 2 years just on what we could grow on a half-acre farm, including domestic animals and all that. And willy-nilly, we wound up in a calorie-restricted but nutrient, dense diet, which our resident doctor, was totally in love with.
So, as a result of that,
yeah, I lost the train of thought, actually.
What were we talking about? Guess I shouldn't have toked before the podcast, huh? That's what we get for drinking and smoking.
Here we go into the unknown. But anyway, that was part. Oh yeah, so
you're talking about cannibalizing each other.
That's right. So why were we discussing cannibalizing? We were hungry.
Yeah, we're hungry.
Okay, we were 5 Americans, 2 people from the UK and 1 from Belgium, and none of us had really experienced hunger on a persistent basis. Not that we were wealthy, but we had adequate means, and there were convenience stores and junk food and all that stuff. And it was shocking in a way that the only time that we were, partially satisfied was during and immediately after a meal.
Right.
So we discussed, if it came down to it, who should we cannibalize? What work would we lose, and how much nutrition would we get?
Right, because everybody in there had a very specialized field that they were working in.
Well, okay, so we started basic, Scott, like, a normal interview. What is Biosphere 2? It was a virtually materially closed, i.e. airtight structure that covered over 3 acres in the South Arizona mountain desert area.
Yeah, it's essentially like a Buckminster Fuller style greenhouse.
Yeah, I mean, we had some geodesic domes, and Bucky Fuller was a great hero and friend to myself and my Institute of Ecotechnics. But anyway, in this mini world, so the idea was twofold. Let's create a mini biosphere for the first time ever, so that we could study fundamental processes that actually keep us alive. Because here's the news flash, which probably most of your generation know already. The only reason that we're alive on planet Earth is not because we have good genes, good karma. It's because our global biosphere keeps us alive.
Right.
That's an important fact.
Yeah, and, like the rainforest and the many oceans and seas and rivers.
Yeah, so, to make a mini biosphere, and it was not a model of planet Earth. That would be beyond what any human construct. But it was kind of like a cross-section of important areas of the tropical biosphere. So as you're mentioning, it included a tropical rainforest, a savanna, which is a tropical grassland with trees, a coastal fog desert, a mangrove wetland system that was collected in the Everglades that went from freshwater marsh to mangroves. And then we had a living coral reef in a mini ocean, a million gallons, which is not immodest. And
Yeah.
then we had to support the 8 resident crew, a half-acre farm, and then all of the, living quarters, entertainment, blah, 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 research laboratories and workshops that you'd need to run this laboratory. So you're mentioning, yeah, in the crew of 8, we tried to have enough people, that could run systems. So if anyone got sick or incapacitated, we could keep the world going.
Right.
So the first purpose is, and we named Biosphere 2 to underline that, this was the setup, the straight man question in a comedy routine. Where was Biosphere 1? Was that failed project that you did in Portland or in Nova Scotia? No, Biosphere 1 is the only biosphere that we know in the universe right now. And it happens to be Earth's biosphere, which is keeping you alive. But the second thing, and the media kind of jumped on this, was Biosphere 2 was a very early Earth-based simulation or attempt to figure out how we live long-term in space.
Right.
So, so if you Google it, Biosphere 2 is a space colony, and because it didn't go perfectly well, it was a complete failure. So it had, which made it kind of a complex project, it had 2 major purposes. One, to make, biospheric ecology experimental, where you could experiment with it. And 2, to begin learning, if we're going to live in space, we may start with hydroponic potatoes and wheat and lettuce, but we'll all go crazy because we need more diversity and ecological health. I grew up in New York City. So when I grew up in Queens. I was born in Brooklyn. When I picture Queens without those, it has so many beautiful parks. And I think of Manhattan without Central Park, completely different and much less life-enhancing environment.
Right. Yeah, for sure.
All right, that was my infomercial for 2.5 minutes.
But wait, there's more. If you order now,
There's way more.
how did you get involved with the improv troupe?
Well, it's not just an improv.
Or sorry, the theater troupe. I'm in an improv troupe. That's why I did that. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I really value it. And, for doing classical plays, we called it an actor's studio or an actor's theater. So we gave great latitude to the actors to be invented, even if we were doing a Shakespeare or Moliere or Aeschylus or Bertolt Brecht, whatever play. But we also did improvisational theater.
Okay.
And how did should I give you the short version? I better.
Sure.
All right. Born in Brooklyn, parents, Russian, Polish Jews who came to the US in the 1920s. They had me when they were fairly old. And, it's a typical upward mobile, the type of poor Jews who really value culture,
Right.
and not money. But notwithstanding that, they wanted all of their kids to become professionals. So my brother became an MD and is now a psychiatrist. That was my kind of doom. That was my fate. And, being academically, facile, I got a full scholarship to Dartmouth College up in New Hampshire, mainly because it was a long way from New York City and I wanted to start living on my own. And after I finished that, and I was majoring in philosophy, and I was taking pre-med because I figured, finally I'd be worn down and I would succumb and become an MD, and if not that, a lawyer. I decided that, screw it, basically. I've kind of done the obligation, at least, we have now 2 college graduates in my family, I wanted to do something different. And this was, right around the time that I graduated in '68. I think first Earth Day was 1 or 2 years later. The whole environmental movement was happening. And, there's one slogan of the '60s that I think, should be revivified. If you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem.
Yeah, totally.
So I thought if I just, apply my, whatever overrated academic skills and whatever to just making money and a career and blah, blah, that wouldn't be as interesting and as potentially fruitful as doing something outside the box. And I was under the doom, my second doom was being drafted to Vietnam.
Oh, damn.
Yeah, so I ran into somebody who'd worked with the Theater of All Possibilities, which is part of the core group that I joined in New Mexico. And she was heading out to New Mexico to join them because they had bought 160 acres of godforsaken, godforsaken but man-degraded land out here, about 20 miles south of Santa Fe. And so, I inherited a VW Bug from my brother, and I drove out with two friends and stayed for 3 days, then 30-day trial, and then 51 years later, we're talking. And what really convinced me that this was interesting, I had no idea what I was walking into, maybe I still don't, is they said, we don't just do one thing. We try to live a balanced, properly human life. So we work on ecology, and wherever we are, whatever the Ecotechnics project is, we want to, contribute, upgrade degraded ecologies, make the land more fruitful, build soil, plant trees, all that kind of good stuff. Number one. Number two, we work in theater as our artistic expression, which is really good because, and you're involved in improv theater. Anyone who's involved in theater know it's also group therapy.
Yeah, yeah.
And a brilliant way of making people who may despise themselves outside the theater to actually drop that social mask, put on the creative mask of theater. And the third one is we want to be self-supporting, and we want to not just have jobs, but run enterprises to support ourselves. So that was the 3 lines of work, as we call it. And when I heard that, that was magic to my ears, because I think what I really dreaded, and I really feel for everyone who faces that threat in the Western world, you need to specialize and make one thing your moneymaker. And then you've got the weekends and, 2 to 6 weeks of holidays if you're in Europe, hardly in the United States. I didn't want a life like that. I wanted a life that actually was meaningful. So I started, and fortunately the group was like, we will work with anyone from the level of a willing and competent on up. If you're incompetent and unwilling, no, that's just
Right.
that's a pain in the ass. So I was certainly a willing and competent because, as a New York City kid, I knew how to do nothing. I mean, it's just amazing to me to look back and realize the ignorance I had of doing the most elementary things.
You mean as far as like living off the land type stuff, and like living that kind of ranch life?
Anything, I mean, and I give this illustration in one of my books. When people would say, could you pick up that 2x4 over there?
Yeah.
I would say, 2x4 what? I didn't realize that 2x4 is a term that you apply to a piece of wood.
Right, right.
Yeah, that's 2 inches thick and 4 inches wide.
So because of your like academic discipline and your heavy involvement with your academics your whole life and living in New York City and kind of having the convenience of living in New York City and being able to go to stores and live in an apartment, everything's kind of, I don't want to say done for you, but you don't have to
Yeah.
really forage anything for yourself or build anything for yourself. It's already kind of there. So
I
because
know
of
it. Yeah, I think that's one of the real tragedies of modern life. And, God knows, I've lived in rural areas. I understand the attractions of cities, and we need to make cities greener. But, that whole mentality that you have your job, and because you're working so many hours, 40, 50 hours on that, you have so little spare time to actually, do all that much yourself. And just like I've been an organic farmer, since I arrived in New Mexico in '69. Uh, and so people say, well, organic farming, isn't that kind of the new fashionable thing? And I say, no. If you go back, just over 200 years ago, everyone who grew food was an organic farmer. There weren't pesticides, there weren't chemical fertilizers. So, I think
right.
a lot of the problem that people in cities have, and I had it for sure, is they call it nature deficit disorder.
Okay.
And that feeling of being disconnected from nature, I think, is really, really spiritually, emotionally, physically, mentally, I may be saying the same word 4 times, debilitating,
Yeah.
because, we love nature. Put,
Well, we are nature.
We are nature. Brilliant, Scott. Now come on with the new age stuff. Because, when I give lectures and people say, oh, what can I do? It seems like, we're all doomed and humans are just this terrible cancer parasite on the planet. I say the first thing you need to do is wake up. And the particular form of waking up that I recommend to you is take a breath of air. Go over and have some kind of food or
Yeah.
water, and then reflect on that those things exist because you are part of a biospheric system. And you are not in any way, aside from your mental derangement, perhaps in, know, are in any way, literally,
Say it.
metabolic, literally, cellularly.
Say that again. You broke up a little bit. You
No,
you
that
you,
was it.
it like chopped up like there was bad service, but I think what you were getting at was it's a synergy.
Well, no, and that's a little too nebulous. No, what I mean is, when we get to why did you actually volunteer to go inside Biosphere 2 for 2 years? But we'll get to that in a minute. The waking up and the illusion that so many Western people are under, and even if they love the environment, they're ecologists, and they vote the right parties and favor the right principles, and understand that, oh, degrading the biosphere is like a really bad idea and it really should be stopped. Messing with the ocean, with the atmosphere, with our climate are things that we really should not be doing. We should back off from that. But even those people don't understand that metabolically, physiologically, physiologically, we are totally dependent on the biosphere for every drop of air that we breathe. Without the biosphere, there wouldn't be 21% oxygen in our air. Without the biosphere, the beautiful water cycle that everyone fell asleep in high school or college to, that that beautiful cycle is actually purifying your water. And the biosphere is producing all this beauty that surrounds us, even in cities. I
Yeah.
think every city has got a green place that you can go, you know. Yeah, so the first waking up is you are not separate from the biosphere.
Right.
And as you're saying, if you love the biosphere and you love pandas and saguaro cactus and redwoods and dolphins and
Yeah.
Bengal tigers, you should love humans because we're children of the biosphere.
Yeah. 100%. It's just we have all these opinions and stuff that make us dislike each other, I guess.
Well, that's a separate question. We'll get to that, which goes back to, and I'm glad you're interested in the interpersonal dramas and difficulty of living with only 7 other people for 2 years. But what I'm getting at is that people really don't grok. There's a good 60s term. Do you know what grok means?
Yeah.
From stranger in a strange land. Yeah, I mean, we really don't understand that we are all biospherians. And so Biosphere 2, when people ask me about the legacy, and we can get into that, and, we probably need a second podcast to talk about it all. But, reflecting on it, we did the Biosphere Project between 1984 and 1994. There was 3 years of closure experiments from 91 to 93. And put yourself back into the far, far distant past when we had to spell the word biosphere to 3/4 of the people that we spoke to. No one had a clue what we were talking about. They couldn't even spell the word. Sustainability, and I think we should be talking about regeneration instead of sustaining, because I don't want to sustain this biosphere. There's a lot of really ugly, miserable things about how
Right.
we treat nature and humans. Anyway, all of that was in the future. And so Biosphere 2 very improbably caught the world's imagination. And we didn't expect that. If we did, we would have built it in Virginia or New York or Tokyo or Los Angeles or London, places that people come. Now, why was the project put in southern Arizona? Because we thought that we'd make just egregious errors. But when we finally figured out how to more or less make a mini biosphere operate, we would make the investment back by selling it to Disney or Orlando, Florida, or to major cities or universities, because they're really charismatic, inspirational things. So the great surprise was when the first European journalists heard about the project, started coming to Biosphere 2 we had just begun construction, but they took this beautiful model that we had, put it up against the background of the mountains of the setting in southern Arizona, and it looked like it was already completed. And suddenly we started getting pilgrims. That's what I call them, pilgrims. They heard about Biosphere 2, and it really somehow touched a nerve. I think because people were in such ignorance of the human relationship with this world that we live in.
Right.
Who are we? So one of the big legacies of Biosphere 2, and this is pre-internet, which is astounding. I'm sure none of your listeners and you can even imagine a world without internet.
Yeah, hardly. I was young, but yeah, hardly.
Yeah, I mean, the internet, there was the beginning of electronic mail, et cetera. But anyway, that was years in the future. Biosphere 2's re-entry after 2 years, so we became worldwide sensation. And people started coming in the dozens, hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands to this obscure place, Oracle, Arizona, in southern Arizona, between Tucson and Phoenix, just to see what was going on and to cheer us on. So Biosphere 2 reached so many people that when we came out after 2 years, we called it the re-entry to Earth ceremony,
Yeah.
September 26, 1993. Through what probably is primitive satellite uplinks to TV stations around the world, close to 1 billion people watched that event.
Wow.
So I've gone, I go, in my ecological work, I go to pretty obscure places and I do talks and et cetera. I've never been anywhere where if I put up a slide of Biosphere 2, there aren't, people, including, people who were once kids or now maybe teenagers or whatever, and they know that image. So we sent out that image, and that image was intrinsically optimistic, because the other way of looking at Biosphere 2 was that it was the first really kick-ass, audacious to the max attempt to figure out how did biospheres operate. And the premise was that we could learn to fit humans and all their technology, including farming, harmoniously into a mini biosphere. And the implications for learning to live on planet Earth are obvious now. They weren't as obvious then because people didn't even know what a biosphere was.
Right. So it's just weird though how it's not weird. I think it's really great the balance that you guys had as a theater troupe or whatever it was, a community, because you were living on a commune and stuff too, right?
Now, we avoided words like commune, counterculture. Why get put into a box? I think I was going to give you a little lecture, which I'll now complete. So, and you and your listeners should, one, read Life Under Glass if this interests you to get more of the story, including the three of the Biospherians looking back about the relevance of it. But if you look at Spaceship Earth, which is a brilliant film, it's a film, not the Epcot attraction, Spaceship Earth. So it released, and it's on various platforms now, both in the U.S. and it's being released overseas. I know it's available in the U.K., I think in Spain, et cetera, Europe. Anyway, Spaceship Earth, kind of does the backstory. And so the Theater of All Possibilities, this is a couple of years before I even, encountered them. They started in Haight-Ashbury during that, the great opening and all that consciousness work and experimentation with community. And here's something that I didn't know is that, the leaders of Haight-Ashbury could see that the whole hippie thing was being co-opted by Madison Avenue and was just a new way to sell fashionable clothes. And, American enterprise is a brilliant way of monetizing anything.
Yep.
So
Capitalism.
Capitalism.
Capitalize on whatever.
Yeah, and we could get into that. We're in a much more pernicious and deadly phase of capitalism. But anyway, the leaders of Haight-Ashbury and the people from Theater of All Possibilities participated in it. They held a big ritual, and it was a big march and ceremonial burial. It was the death of Mr. Hippie. This is 1967, maybe early 68. And they said, it's over. It's over. It's been wonderful, this little efflorescence of freedom and creativity and community working in Haight-Ashbury. The term has been, appropriated, capitalized, monetary. And so anyone who calls himself a hippie hereafter kind of is kind of living in the past. And from that, I think, there's a legitimate way to say that some of those leaders of the Haight-Ashbury said, what we need to do now is kind of get down to basics. And I think that's when the commune movement really began. Let's go on the land, learn how to build buildings in a new way, learn how to grow food, experiment with how we can live together in a more creative way than we've been inherited. The Whole Earth Catalog, emerged at that time, access to tools, so back to my ignorant, city slicker ways. If you're going to do things practically, you need to value and understand how to use tools. So, so the whole, so being called a commune or a hippie, we always avoided that because that marginalizes you. And,
Right.
and God knows, when I arrived in 69, northern New Mexico was one of the hotbeds of the communal movement. There was Llama Foundation, Morning Star, the Hog Farm, on and on and on. And we went up to Llama Foundation and did a theater play. And our audience was pretty much all the communes that come in to see our performance. So I love, I love that generation. That's my generation. But we never wanted to be categorized that way because then you're marginalized. What do you mean counterculture? In my opinion, and I'll tell you my favorite quote from Gandhi. Someone said, what do you think of Western civilization? You know this one, Scott?
No, sir, I don't.
You could use it in your comedy routine. He said, after thinking for a while, that's a good idea. Maybe there should be one. So what do you mean counterculture? If you're actually doing creative work and trying to experiment and invent new cultural forms, and I think like the 3 lines of work, that's a new cultural form. I'm not saying everyone should do it, and maybe you do something else for your artistic expression and do something else, aside from ecology. But, anyway, we
It's not
always,
counter, it's just its own.
yeah, it's its own. If you're a counterculture, or if you're a commune, or if you're a hippie, all of these terms kind of put you in some, oh, those are strange people over there, let's circle them in red. And
Well, did some of that have to
maybe
do
the
with,
FBI should be looking at them too.
right, did some of that have to do with the Manson family, that you guys didn't want to get labeled with hippie, commune, and so forth?
No, I mean, as I was telling you, I mean, they, the people that I worked with, and, a number of those people, now old geezers like I am, they were there when Mr. Hippie was buried. So why would you take a term that, even the people who, supposedly were hippies? I mean, I think they said, hippiedom was kind of a Time Life magazine invention anyway. That's not what they called themselves.
Right.
I mean, we're human beings.
Yeah,
We're
we're
not.
individuals. And that's the most important thing, is to remain individual. Well, sorry. Um, yeah, when you start grouping yourself, you start losing sense of yourself, and you start letting hive mind think for you. You lose your individuality. And when you're not self-reliant, you're not really a man, a woman, whatever. You're a
Yeah.
drone.
Well, I mean, why have other people try to define you and put you in a box?
Yeah, totally.
No one wants to be in a box, even
Well,
though I went into a box for 2 years. But I like to think that we just excluded the world for 2 years.
see, uh, but it's weird, because were you guys already kind of excluded in the situation that you were before, living on the ranch and stuff?
Well, okay, let me give you a little précis. So, Theater of All Possibilities, they scratched up $14,500 to do a down payment on 160 acres of Synergia Ranch. But, we then founded the Institute of Ecotechnics. That's kind of our scientific ecological arm. And, the term kind of explains it all, ecotechnics. We wanted to bring those two worlds together, because what's, messing up the world, degrading the world, is that we're in love, we're all technophiles. We love technology. By the way, there's a weed machine going on. Can you hear it? There's a
At,
weed whacker going on.
at your house?
No, outside my house.
Yeah, outside your house?
You can't hear it?
No, I can't hear it.
Okay, maybe we edit that out if you care to do that. I can hear it really badly, and it's bugging me. And I could tell those guys to go somewhere else.
No, no, it's fine. I can't hear it.
Okay, I've lost my train of thought anyway. Oh yeah, Institute of Ecotechnics. Yeah, I mean, kind of our major perception, and we weren't the only people who saw it, is that the world of technology has kind of unconsciously declared war on our biosphere,
Yeah, yeah.
local ecosystems to the global thing. Now in an age of global climate change and concern about the loss of the rainforest and other natural biomes, I mean, this is really clear. So we wanted to make a small institute and do practical work in challenging biomes. So Institute of Ecotechnics kind of went, in a small way, because we're only 50 to 100 people at max. We went planetary. So in 1975, we built a research ship in Oakland, California, the Heraclitus, named after the Greek philosopher, which has traveled the world for 40 years, now being rebuilt, looking for volunteers and funding in Catalonia, Spain. And we started a series of biomic projects. So after about a decade at the ranch, learning, basic ecology, farming, etc., I went to the outback of Australia, because one of our projects was in the Kimberley region, which is way the hell up in Northwest Australia, like 2,500 miles from Perth and 1,500 miles from Darwin. So that was our tropical savanna project. Then in London, because the world city is a biome, if you ignore cities, you're totally an illusion. So modern ecologists understand that urban populations in cities drive a great deal of the human impact. So we started an art gallery in London. And because we always try to do something that hasn't been done before, we made that gallery, and I'll give a plug to them. It's a really wonderful venue, the October Gallery, very close to the British Museum in Russell Square, has specialized in what we call the trans-vanguard. So it's not just a London gallery. We're trying to take the brilliant, creative, pushing the envelope artists from around the world, and I think they've now shown close to 90 different cultures. We want to give them a venue and get them out of, speaking of boxes, the box of ethnic art. So the term avant-garde, which means sort of cutting edge,
Yeah.
that had been traditionally restricted to American and Western European artists. So we call it the trans vanguard because really, if you're from Samoa or the Congo or the Philippines or wherever, if you're a cutting edge artist, you're part of the trans vanguard. So we started that gallery, and it's actually made a big dent in and influence in the world of art in London and elsewhere. Then a rainforest project in Puerto Rico, a tropical, a Mediterranean project in the south of France. So very quickly, over 7 or 8 years, the Institute of Ecotechnics went from being just based in New Mexico to having projects in what we thought were key and challenging biomes. And our requirements were a little bit weird. We wanted to go to places where it's difficult, where conventional approaches and conventional economics have failed. And usually those are places of ecological crisis and cultural crisis. And for an institute with limited access to capital, this also means that real estate and buying land and property is really inexpensive.
So what became of that?
It's still ongoing. And in fact, I'm the chairman of the Institute. I've been the chairman since 1982.
Okay.
So we run these projects to get the ground truth. So by the way, if you're thinking, what would it take? What kind of a backstory would you need for attempting something as outrageous and difficult as Biosphere 2? Well, you might have a group of kind of creative, out-of-the-box individuals who don't think that artists should be separated from scientists and engineers from thinkers, and who have worked in the key biomes that were in Biosphere 2 for a decade before we began the project. So if you were to, I think the word is reverse engineer. So it's funny, because life is kind of more organic and, serendipity and synchronicity kind of thing. So the idea of Biosphere 2 emerged because we started having these really grand, small scale, but important conferences once a year. And we basically would invite our heroes from science, from art, from exploration, from thinking, from different cultures, and get them together in a non-media, circumstance environment to exchange ideas. And so, my generation, we grew up with the Apollo project. Werner von Braun and the space enthusiasts thought that we'd actually have people on Mars in the mid-'80s. We've kind of, that's kind of lagged. But we met a lot of people, astrogeologists, planetary geologists, people from NASA, et cetera. And it was really clear that we knew a lot about how to get people into space with rockets, with spacecraft. That was, and it's still progressing madly fast. But how to live in space seemed to be a forgotten child, kind of typical. So we thought that there was a great opportunity in working on systems that would be essential for life support of humans long term in space. And when we started investigating the field, we discovered that who are the leaders in the field? It wasn't NASA or the Europeans or the Japanese. The Chinese at that point hardly had a space program. It was the Russians, the Soviets. So I became, among my other roles at Biosphere 2, the chief emissary to make contact and get cooperation with the Russian leaders in the field. So I went to Moscow and then Siberia, even while the Soviet Union was going. And we found the most brilliant people who'd been doing stuff that NASA still hasn't replicated. And because we knew, here's another, name for you and your listeners, we were familiar with the work of Vernadsky, Vladimir Vernadsky. He wrote the seminal book called The Biosphere when he was teaching at the Sorbonne in France in the 1920s. And he's really a revered character in Russia. So the fact that we were not ignorant Westerners and we actually knew some of the history of biospheric science, that I think helped open the door. And when they heard about Biosphere 2, even just as an idea and concept, they realized that we would take the field of space life support and closed ecological systems, which was pretty rudimentary, 15 food crops, very small facilities. We would take it up to a Vernadskyan biospheric level. They were fantastically energized, and we had absolute cooperation, both with their leaders at the Moscow Institutes and in Siberia is where they had their most advanced systems.
So were you kind of the ambassador for Russia because you spoke the language, because of your family?
It's one of the tragedies of my life, by the way, is that the dominant language in my household is Yiddish.
Okay.
The
That makes
Jewish
sense.
language of the Eastern European. But my father spoke Russian, my mother spoke Polish, and I only learned this. My father died when I was only 16 in the mid 60s, and I didn't hear the story from my brother until decades later. He was practicing his high school Spanish.
It's an alarm. I'm sorry about that. You were talking
Okay.
about after your father passed away. Sorry.
You're going to edit this thing and clean it up, right?
Yes. And I'm going to turn my phone off too.
Oh my God. Can you actually be in a...
You know what? Let's just start the whole thing over.
Okay, but it's been this whole conversation I love, but it's been such a digression. Where the hell did this come from?
Yeah, it's pretty sporadic and chaotic. It's fun.
It's good. All right.
If anybody listens to it, they'll definitely go crazy.
What do you mean if anyone listens to it? Your mom is going to listen to it. Your best friend and girlfriend are. No.
My mom's probably not going to listen to it. I don't have a girlfriend. I'll let my dog listen to it while I'm like at work or something. I don't work. That was a lie. I'm sorry.
I know. Well, I have a partner, and I know she's not going to listen to it. She's so bored with all this stuff.
She's like, I can hear you from the next room.
But she did get. We had the great fun. You could be recording. We had the great fun that Spaceship Earth premiered at Sundance in January. And who knew that was the last major film festival? Everything else has been, had to go digital. So it was really a blast. We cooperated quite a bit with the director and the producers of Spaceship Earth and gave them access to a huge archive. So they had 600 hours of archival imagery to work with. Anyway, that was great fun. Anyway, the reason that I went to the Soviet Union was that I was a director of the project of Biosphere 2, and my title was I was the director of environmental and space applications. So I liaisoned with a lot of the ecological and science conferences and people, and went to a lot of space conferences. And it was through that I learned that the Russians, the Soviets, were the leaders in the field. So yeah, I kind of became the ambassador, and it was, in those years, it was so funny. I went in on a tourist visa for a few days in Moscow, and vitally, I had a few telephone numbers because it's hard to imagine how closed down the Soviet Union was. There were no telephone books in Moscow
Really?
because that was considered to be too dangerous. If someone was going to organize a revolution or an uprising, they might need to contact people. So I came in on a tourist visa and I had a few names and phone numbers. And I realized now, I was staying at a hotel near Red Square, that when they said to me, like the head of Oleg Gizenko is the head of one of the most important space institutes in Moscow. Oh, we'll come down to your hotel. And he came down with his translator. He couldn't speak. No, I couldn't speak any Russian. I know where this all started. I was not the ambassador to Russia because I could speak Russian. My father, who could speak Russian, never spoke it in the house. He spoke Yiddish.
Okay.
And he even knew Spanish because he had lived in Mexico and Cuba when he was trying to enter the United States in the 1920s. But anyway, another story. But I only realized somewhat later that why did Gizenko come down to my hotel with his translator, who was also his deputy director? Because it would take weeks and weeks to get an American permission through the party to come and visit his top secret space institute.
Right.
So it's much easier for for them to come down and over vodka and other delicacies.
Is that what you guys did? Did you drink vodka with them?
Oh yeah,
That's cool.
and caviar. And
Caviar?
here's the thing, which has made me apparently a lot of people. I have a lot of Russian friends. They're really great people. But here's the story that came out is I started talking about Biosphere 2, and I was driving tractors in Australia and being a farmer and all that stuff. And Gizenko took my hand, at the beginning of the meeting. I thought, oh, it's kind of a nice warm gesture, right? And then he didn't let go for like 2 hours.
Huh. Do you think that was like like how they would in olden times, when they shake hands, they would kind of grasp wrists to make sure nobody had a sword? Do you think that was kind of like what he was doing? I'm just going to hold on to you to make sure you don't go for any weapons or anything like that?
I don't know. I don't think so. He could tell I was fairly harmless.
You think he was hitting on you?
He was definitely not hitting on me. I met his wife. No, the first thing that I actually thought was, and he liked to describe himself as the unofficial psychiatrist to generations of cosmonauts. That's what the Russians call astronauts.
Yeah.
And he heard stories, the real stories of what happened when there were 2 and 3 people in space, space stations from Salyut through Mir. He heard all the nitty gritty of it, and he was kind of the father confessor. So one is I thought, well, Gizenko is kind of checking me out. And, so I'm talking about, the practical work that I and people at the Institute do. And maybe he was checking out, this guy's actually got calluses. He actually works with his hands.
Right.
And I think also, in the Soviet Union, they actually didn't practice Marxism. It was really an abomination of a system that got instituted. But they all grew up with this idea about, the dictatorship of the proletariat. And I think, what Gizenko was also pretty amused was, here's this guy, clearly, somewhat educated for a Westerner, university-wise, who actually works with his hands. And there's a certain ground truth that people pick up from that. And then the other thing, because I mentioned I lost my father when I was relatively young. I could see in my life I've had all of these father figures. And I fell in love with Gizenko, and he fell in love with me as kind of a father figure. And, so I talked about, we found an English translation of part of Vernadsky's Biosphere. And we would love to have one of his team write an introduction. So this is what he tells me. We will do this, but the next time you come to Moscow, you have to bring me a bottle of very fine Scotch whiskey. Because even though I'm the head of an institute with 300 PhDs and 3,000 employees, they had their own mission control with a lot of the probes and space launches that the Soviets were doing. He said, I have a very modest hotel. It reminded me of my poor aunts and uncles in Brooklyn when I was growing up. But I have the best stock bar in Moscow. So anyway, it was very real. So, that story, when I've made lots of trips and, we did a lot of work with our Russian friends, that story kind of travels. And I remember the last time I was in Moscow, unfortunately, was in 2014. And I went to Gouzenko's Institute. I was talking to some people, and they said, you're famous. You're the guy that Gouzenko held hands with for 3 hours. So
That's strange.
he apparently didn't do that with no, he was a really wonderful, amazing guy.
That's really cool though, because I can almost feel it from you telling me over the internet, the energy from that story and from that experience that you had with him. And it's amazing that he could sense your, for lack of a better term, your vibe. He could sense that you were a good person, that you were real. And even through that language barrier, even though you had a translator, there's still a certain sense that you get off people, you know what I mean? So for him to see that through all of what the fuck ever the news would have you think about, Russian-American relations, that's beautiful. That's warm.
Well, the other thing that I really, really got is how to say this, the creative people in Russia, including their scientists and artists and poets, they had to not only be geniuses and passionate, but they had to be really cunningly smart to, fly under the radar where they wouldn't be sent to the gulag.
Right.
So they were amazing. They're amazing people. I'll send you, Scott, for your fun. Maybe you put it on your website, because one of the pictures I really love. So Gouzenko later joined the Scientific Advisory Committee for Biosphere 2, and he came several times to the Biosphere. I got the Yuri Gagarin Medal for International Cooperation in the Environment and Space from him after I came out. But anyway, there's a beautiful picture of, we called it the Biospherian handshake. So, you put your fingerprints up against the glass. And I have that with Oleg Gouzenko and also with John Allen, my dear friend and colleague who actually invented the idea of Biosphere 2. It's very sweet. It was only later, this is a comedy show. It's only later, by the way, that we learned we didn't invent that. That's what prisoners do with their visitors.
Yeah. That's how I used to visit my dad.
True?
That's not a joke. It's not a joke, but it's funny. But John Allen was kind of the leader of your group that you were a part of.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think it's absurd. People, when they try to demean you, have called us a cult.
Yeah.
And my basic, John.
Why did they call you guys a cult? Was it because you were in the New Age? Were you guys into Eastern mysticism? Like, I don't understand.
Cult is such an easy word to throw at people that you don't like and want to discredit.
Yeah.
The first time it was used, I was mentioning the Dr. Roy Walford, who was a pioneer in that restricted calorie diet that we wound up following unwillingly. When he was said, the people have been, calling this a cult. Why are you associated with a cult? Well, no, we were called an intellectual cult. He said, I love intellectual cults. I belong to another one. It's called UCLA.
Yeah.
He was a professor at the medical school.
It's like,
yeah.
have you ever heard of Christianity?
What?
It's like, have you ever heard of Christianity?
Well, okay, maybe that's where I'm not going to go. But I totally agree. When you actually look at world religions and the set of beliefs that people run around professing, it gets kind of surreal.
Yeah. I've just recently finished watching a documentary about the Sannyasins,
Oh yeah,
whatever,
the wild, what's it called? The Wild West, the
Wild
rise.
Wild Country.
Yeah,
And
that's totally,
that was,
that's a total illustration of what not to do. You know, but I mean, I confess now that there was kind of an inner tradition that we were involved with. I don't know why we didn't share with people that occasionally and voluntarily there was meditation, and we read from Tibetan Buddhism, and we were friends. We actually started a project with Tibetan Buddhists in Kathmandu, and I'm
well, it's
very
because in this country, everyone's so indoctrinated because of Christianity and the Roman Catholic Church that anything remotely involved with Eastern tradition is like considered demonic. It's very taboo.
well. We also had the old-fashioned idea that that was kind of our private business,
That's
but
true too.
the other thing that I kind of like is that we talked about what kind of path are we following, and there's lots of different yogas. Hatha yoga is the physical one. Bhakti yoga, is that the one devotional one? Anyway, Jnana yoga. There's a path called karma yoga, and the Sufis are kind of into that too. Karma yoga is, the path is to be in the world, to act in the world, but not be totally consumed by it. So the Sufis say you're in the world, but you're not of it. And the thing about karma yoga is, can you do things that you think are beneficial to the people around you? Let's extend that to the ecology around you, to the planet, to the biosphere, but to do it without hope of praise and money and status and prestige and power, or fear of blame, the stick, prison, being castigated in the mainstream news, whatever, losing your friends and property. So karma yoga is to do actions that you think are necessary and useful. But what makes it a yoga is that you're not doing it, for the usual reasons that humans do things. They
Right.
want to advance themselves, get ego gratification. So it's kind of a subtle thing. And I love that idea of karma yoga. So if I had to say, what tradition do I and some of my colleagues follow, it's kind of that, how do you not lose yourself, but be involved? I have respect for national parks. Hey, humans can be really destructive, really beautiful and biodiverse places. Yeah, let's put a fence around it and limit what humans can do. And sure, if you have the calling to be a monk, to devote yourself, in a monastery and all of that, although we see with the Catholic Church the difficulties that could be, when it's not really your calling. But the more difficult thing, and this is like for ecotechnics. So yeah, we believe in marine exclusion zones and biosphere reserves and national parks. But the real challenge is, how do we interact with the nature around us and increase the pie, make the carrying capacity, the biomass, the biodiversity good, meet human needs while upgrading the ecology. That's the real trick. And so spiritually, it's kind of how can I be involved with the world but not get lost in it?
Okay. I like that. What do you mean by get lost in it, though? I understand like pouring yourself into the now, living in the moment, experiencing nature, but what do you mean by getting lost in it?
Well, getting lost in it is when you complete, like I like the Buddha's teaching. I wouldn't call myself a Buddhist, but I've taken the Bodhisattva vow a couple of times. I've had the privilege of doing silent retreats with Rinpoches and teaching with the Dalai Lama. The Buddhists are the cause of human suffering is attachment
Right.
and seeking the permanent in the impermanent. So there's a real problem, so we have
Okay.
this kind of false dyad that we have people who are, activists and they're out there. And then we have the people who, I'm going to save the world by visualizing world peace and, developing my inner body. Well, those two things can be brought together, but the usual problem is people of action get absorbed and identified with it.
Right.
So that's what I mean by, and that's what I think that Sufi phrase that I love, being in the world, but not of it,
Okay.
that you have an inner life. And that to me is, a wonderful formula. I mean, I love that, which has happened really in your lifetime accelerating, but it started back in the 60s that Westerners, in this world of plenty and material domination and technophilia, we're turning to indigenous sources, traditions, the wisdom of the East. But how do you do that without being a fake fakir or Sufi or
Right.
Tibetan?
Right.
How do you do that and still maintain your relationship? Because I think for most people, we want to be engaged with the world. And this is why, when people throw that cult thing at, that's one of the values of having enterprise. So for example, in Australia, we ran that project as a seed company. We needed seed to improve the pasture, reverse desertification, but we also, paid expenses by selling seed to other pastoralists in Australia and even internationally, or selling hay, or doing whatever you're doing. If you run an enterprise, then you're involved with the world and you get feedback. So you might think, oh, we're just the cat's pajamas. But if people, like I'm an organic farmer now, and do people like our produce? Do they buy it? Do people come back for more? Do we do well at farmers markets? You
Right.
know, you get that feedback. And I think that that's the ultimate problem I have with cults is they tend to just kind of like cookie cutter replicate the guru.
Got you.
And
Yeah.
they create a bubble where you don't get feedback from the life around you. And a human without feedback, unless you are, the 1/10 of 1% or 1/100th of 1%, that makes you stagnate.
Right.
We're part of the world, and I think it's really important that we're contemporary. I mean, you're a theater guy. Bertolt Brecht said, a theater without an audience is a nonsense. You can have really great theater and no one comes to your performances. There's something wrong there. And he
Right.
also said, an actor in a theater company needs to sail with the contemporary wind. So you need to make, if you want your art, your comedy, your theater, or whatever to be relevant, you need to be addressing what are the issues of our time.
Right. Right. And not be living in a prehistoric time. We're trying to, not that there's nothing wrong with living off the land or getting back to your roots, but there needs to be a balance between the practical, the impractical, the faith in the works. My thing lately is I have been listening to like a lot of Alan Watts and shit like that, right? And I was like, I'm doing too much of this. Like, I need some practical knowledge. So I started like buying and reading these like survival books, like wilderness skills and stuff like that. Just trying to literally get a balance, because if I'm just taking in Alan Watts and all this conceptual knowledge, that's not really doing anything for me.
Right.
But at the same time, like this is cool and all, and it is cool to get back to like primal instincts.
What does it say?
How to stay alive in the woods. And
I've
like
got a book that you'd love, How to Shit in the Woods.
How to Shit in the Woods. Do you read it when you shit in the morning?
No, in Biosphere 2, I was in charge of the sewage system. And
Yeah, so where would you guys poop?
It was fairly normal, aside from we wanted to minimize consumables. So we had a little spray device, kind of like the Middle Easterns. We didn't use toilet paper, but we had flush toilets. But then all of that stuff, and from all of the human activities and from the domestic animals, laboratories, workshops, came down to the basement. And I was in charge of that. We had the equivalent of septic tanks and then a beautiful constructed wetland. And this is a technology that I absolutely fell in love with. Plants and microbes love our waste products. And plants grow luxuriously. They purify the water. In Biosphere 2, we sent that purified water back to irrigate the soils from which we were living. So it was a beautiful cycle. So after that, I decided to go back, get some graduate degrees, a PhD with Odom of ecological engineering at University of Florida. And I worked the Biosphere Foundation, then started a company called Wastewater Gardens International. So we build these constructed wetlands around the world. We've been in 15 countries.
I saw
So
that on your website. I was reading about those on your website.
Yeah, the book I wrote in 2014 is called The Wastewater Gardener. So we call our systems wastewater gardens because it's not just a reed bed, not just a monoculture. You can put all kinds of really beautiful plants that attract birds and beneficial insects, create habitat for them, harvestable plants, fruits, and trees you can cut down. The subtitle of that book is called Preserving the Planet One Flush at a Time.
Okay.
So it's another, great illustration that we really need a sea change in our thinking. And our thinking that, our shit, I guess we can say that on your show.
Yeah.
Can't say that on NPR to this day. That all of our waste is not really waste, they're resources. And that was another thing that I learned in Biosphere 2. When you make a closed system, you have to figure out how to recycle everything.
Right.
So they're not waste. The byproducts of one system have to be the resources for another.
Right. So a lot of composting involved.
Yeah, so we composted, and the wastewater gardens was a way of taking both our domestic animals, byproducts, and the human wastewater and put it back to productive use.
That's genius. That's ingenious.
I know, and I loved it. That was close to the windows. And during the 2 years that we're there, I don't know, 500,000 to 1 million people made the long journey and circumnavigated Biosphere 2, usually with a tour guide. And occasionally I'd be working in there, cutting the vegetation so it regrow, and we fed the stuff either to the domestic animals or composted. And I could see the incredulity in these faces up there. This is a sewage system, and this guy is wading around in it, in my rubber boots, of course. And so I really like that idea, because I think what I appreciated in Biosphere 2, and we were talking about nature separation disorder syndrome, is that we're separated from it. I think you were talking about that too. And so what I loved about these constructed wetlands or wastewater gardens is it connects you at either a house or a cluster of houses or a business or a hotel to all the waste that then create these beautiful gardens. And we went down to the Yucatan in Mexico, where we collected the corals for Biosphere 2. And we, by putting in these systems, we created beautiful gardens, and we prevented the sewage from going out and damaging the coral reefs and the marine environment. Beautiful. And then people become interested. What am I going to put, what kind of cleaning detergents am I going to use? What's going to go down my drain? Because now, and I'm assuming that you're connected to some kind of a sewage system.
Yeah.
You don't give a rat's ass what goes down there.
Yeah, we don't think about that
never
shit.
gone down to that sewage treatment plant, and if you did, it wouldn't make your heart go pitter patter. But if you have right outside your door a beautiful tropical, if it's in the tropics or whatever climate, this beautiful garden, then you get worried. Can I use that oven cleaner? can I use that product, when I'm cleaning my bathrooms and sinks and all that kind of stuff? Because you're bonded. This is part of our human nature. We are in love with nature. So suddenly you start to understand the water coming into whatever house, business, hotel, restaurant is going out there. And it's really great. So here's the change of thinking. And we did a lot for tourists. There's a lot of tourism on the Yucatan Peninsula. So a tourist restaurant, you encourage the people to use the bathroom when they get off the buses or out of their cars. Don't save it for going back to the city. Use our toilets. And you imagine, okay, I just use the toilet and I come out, and what is the greenery surrounding this restaurant? That's the wastewater garden. And it's flourishing because people like me have given our nutrients to it.
That's really cool. That's awesome.
So the end of that book I have is probably not going to become a bestseller. The Feces Meditation.
The Feces Meditation.
Yes, the Feces Meditation. So you start to investigate wherever you are. Where is your water coming from? Go and see where it's collected, the watershed, the reservoirs, and where is it leaving? And get interested in that and connected. So what I love about these small systems is they connect people with the basic realities of their life. What's more basic than the water that comes in, that you cook with and flush toilets and take showers and flush your toilets with, and where the water goes?
Oh, yeah.
Hell yeah. You could be an ambassador for it.
No, yeah.
Feces Meditation.
I just pulled up wastewatergardens.com, and I able to look at some of these photos of the gardens, and they are beautiful.
Well, that's the other thing, by the way. I'll give you another one of my tirades, rants. I have a problem with environmentalists, and I have a problem with the word environment, because the nature of language, you use a term like that, it makes it seem like that's something outside of you. There's no environment outside of you. You are part of it. We were talking about that earlier.
Mm-hmm.
And ditto with, things like your waste. Your waste products, are going to be one way or another eventually dealt with by the biosphere. But let's do it in an intelligent, meaningful way. I'll send you an ebook of the Wastewater Gardener.
No, I have to get my own. I have to get a physical copy.
Okay.
I can't read on the computer screen.
Okay.
It'll strain my eyes and drive me crazy, and I'll break my computer.
Well, it's great. You can support. It's published by Synergetic Press, which is an offshoot. Dear friend Deborah Snyder runs it. So you're supporting a great independent publisher, and I might get 65 or 75 cents of your purchase as a royalty.
You deserve that royalty. I think the Wastewater Gardener is a good book to get too, especially for people that are interested in like homesteading and living off the land. I assume you live on you're an organic farmer, so I imagine a lot of what you're doing out there is self-sufficient, self-sustainable.
Well, we're trying to regenerate this property, this 160 acres. So, we didn't go into that story. And the first thing that really got me was they said, well, what's our long-term goal at Synergia Ranch? And I had only grown up in the East, in New York, and beautiful, really, trees really grew. And I'd gone to college up in New England, New Hampshire, beautiful country. I had once traveled across the country, but I had never seen land as devastated and desolate as New Mexico. And it's really a sad story. In less than 50 years, they basically wrecked this land. They dynamited out the native trees, plowed it up, had a very short-lived agriculture, set off, decades and decades of erosion. So I was put in charge of trees and gardens, and our motto is learn by doing. So, of course, I learned later that my grandparents in the old country, they actually grew their food. You know, in Russia, my father's family, you know, grew potatoes and made vodka, and that was kind of their cash crop.
Really?
I'm sure they drunk it. They said, "Oh, we sold that to the Russian peasants." Yeah.
My
Anyway,
my
so,
great
so
grandparents were moonshine runners.
all right,
My great great grandparents, excuse me.
all right. That's a noble lineage. We home brewed, by the way, everything that we could think of in Biosphere 2.
Oh yeah.
Banana wine, rice, beer, kind of like the Tibetan chung.
Did you guys have any psychoactive plants in there?
Not that we use, but you know, as part of the ecology of the rainforest, we had Banisteria, Banisteria caapi,
Okay.
which is one of the ingredients of ayahuasca.
Yeah.
But you know, I mean, you know, we were law-abiding citizens, so
Right.
when you're under the scrutiny of the world media,
I was about to say, at least when you're under that magnifying glass, literally.
well, and also, you know, one reason that I don't like commune and hippie is, you know, I had my background in mind altering and consciousness changing uh, experiences before I came out and joined the Institute of Ecotechnics. But, you know, we were drug free. One is that we didn't want to be busted and shut down for such a trivial reason. And the other thing is, you know, if you use those substances, I think the real question is, how can you change your life to live, you know, whatever, you know, realities that you see, revelations that you see? I think that's the hard part of it. The Sufis, you know, you can see my fondness for Sufi thinking. They say, look, you know, those kind of mind-opening substances they're valuable. They certainly shouldn't be a reason anyone's put in prison, and it's crazy that they're criminalized. But they say that that gives you a taste of what's possible. Now the
Right.
real work is how can you realize that, you know, with meditation and whatever activities, how can you structure your life in light of what you've seen about yourself, and, you know, to try to make that a reality.
Yeah. It's like I've heard this analogy too. It's like getting on an elevator and it takes you up to the 10th floor, it opens the doors and shows you this awesome party, and then it takes you back down. And the trick is to figure out how to get off the elevator without, you know, the use of psychedelics.
Yeah. So this is where you also need to be reality based.
Right,
You
right.
need to make sure that there's actually a ground at the 10th floor.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that's true.
You don't want to just step out. Oh, that's what I don't like about New Age thinking. I think sometimes those people, you know, I don't know. I shouldn't be mocking them because you know, I think that the New Age thinking is a healthy response to a culture that has really marginalized almost anything inner spiritual. It's commodified everything. I think that's one of the terrible things about the economic system that's now dominating planet Earth. It really has no value aside from money and the things that money can buy and the power that money can buy.
Money
And
and
that,
prestige.
yeah, and prestige, yeah. Yeah, you know, I like to say, you know, so we had our 15 minutes of fame and probably 20 years of infamy because the mainstream media really, you know, ripped the hole out of our souls by misinterpreting what we were doing at Biosphere 2. And, you know, at the time, you know, we're not complete morons. I think we minimized how revolutionary and radical Biosphere 2 is. But now when I talk about it, I'm kind of proud. Yeah, we said this to business as usual. It's destroying the
Yeah.
planet and it's destroying humans.
Yeah.
And you know, so some things that happened, you know, totally should have been in a comedy routine. We had a lot of VIP and muy importante people come to Biosphere 2. And one of them that comes to mind is Mr. Toyota of the Toyota Motor Company of Japan.
Really.
And I love Japan. I used to go there. I love kabuki and no theater, and there are aspects of Japanese culture that I'm absolutely agog about. But he came with his corporate entourage, and literally, you know, this would be in a comedy routine. He said, "Oh, I've been following Biosphere 2. Wonderful, wonderful project. The only thing that makes me sad is that you do not have one of my beautiful cars in there.
Why aren't you marketing for Toyota, Mark?
I know. So, you know, what we didn't say to him is, Mr. Toyota, if we turned on one of your beautiful cars, maybe for 10 minutes, we would all have to evacuate Biosphere 2
No
because
shit.
the pollution that it was producing, you know, would absolutely make our limited atmosphere, even when you have 85-foot ceilings, your atmosphere is really tiny. We would literally have to leave this place. We didn't say that. Oh, thank you for visiting. Thank you for visiting.
Yeah, if you guys
You
cut
know,
on a Toyota for 4Runner in there, you would have smogged out quick.
well, you know, there's another story. When Columbia University took over Biosphere 2, and they tried to rewrite the history and write all of us mavericks, radicals out of it. On one of the, you know, I have family who live in Tucson, so I go there often. On one of my trips to Biosphere 2 in the late 90s, I went into Biosphere 2, and where we had our domestic animals, our pigs and chickens and African pygmy goats, they had a display on how the auto industry is helping the environment. And they had a Volvo. They had a Volvo sitting there, like in a showroom. And it was kind of like,
They must
you
have
know,
heard that story from Mr. Toyota.
I know, you know, this is like, you know, sometimes reality just blows your mind. It's way more absurd and fantastical than you could possibly invent. Now, Volvo, of course, had given a few $1 million
Of
to
course.
Columbia University, etc.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Doesn't
Yeah.
the
Anyway, so Biosphere 2 is really radical. It was really radical. I mean, it was beyond, our farm was beyond organic. Some of the sprays that we contemplated using, which are used and approved by organic growers, couldn't be used in Biosphere 2 because Biosphere 2 is intended for a 100-year experiment. So the media tried to, you know, truncate it. It's a 2-year survival space colony experiment. You know, you wouldn't put that many resources into making such an amazing facility. And anyone who is in Southern Arizona, you know, I love that the University of Arizona is, you know, who now own and operate it. They're doing research in it. It's open for tours, pay the money because it'll just blow your mind. The engineering and the architecture and what you can still see of the biomes that were created, you know, it's just breathtaking. Take your breath away.
no, I imagine it's amazing. I imagine it's a really interesting experience to just take the tour, let alone live there for 2 years. But I know that was a struggle for you guys for 2 years with the
I know,
oxygen and the food, the
we have
coffee.
it. Yeah, the coffee. Uh, well, do you want to do a second podcast? My God, this has been an hour and a half.
Yeah, we could do a second podcast, Mark. I didn't even really get to ask you. I had a bunch of questions written down because I did study and do research. See, look.
Well, yeah, next time, why don't we make the center of it? Because I love to tell stories about the human experience of being in Biosphere 2.
Okay,
Why don't
we
we
could do
make
that.
that you had said that was your interest, and we hardly talked about that.
Well, yeah, as being a comedian, like I'm obviously interested in social aspects and sociology and stuff.
So here's my thing, you know, all that background material that I sent you,
Uh huh.
destroy a tree and print it out.
Destroy a tree and print it out.
Well, not the whole book, but a few of the other background things. They're like 10 or 15 pages.
Well, did you send me a whole book in here? Oh,
I
you
did,
sent me Life Under Glass.
yeah, the new Life Under Glass.
That's what this PDF is? It's the whole book?
Well, I sent you the press release because we got a lot of great comments from scientists who really appreciate bias. Yeah, but I
Yeah.
also sent you, for example, the misconceptions that the mass media promulgate about Biosphere 2 and some of the accomplishments of it.
Okay.
Print that
Yeah.
one.
Okay.
Buy the book.
Yeah, I will. I will. If nobody else does, I'll at least buy the book so this podcast wasn't for nothing. I mean, I had fun. Did you have fun?
I did.
What else are you going to do on a Wednesday afternoon?
Well, you know why I had to push this back? I was harvesting cucumbers.
Okay.
You know, they're really important things that podcasts sometimes have to play second fiddle to.
Totally. When you take your cucumbers, do you your personal cucumbers, do you slice them up and soak them in vinegar?
No, I don't.
No,
Do
that's
you?
something. Yeah, when I was growing up, that's something my family did. Slice cucumber. We had garden and stuff. We would slice the cucumbers up and soak them in apple cider vinegar with
And
some
then eat
salt and
them.
pepper. Yeah, good stuff.
I'll try that. I mean, we have amazing. I mean, all of our produce because we built beautiful soils is pretty amazing.
So,
So
are you like a national distributor, regional
no, no, no,
distributor?
no, no. You
No.
know, our organic farm is 4 acres of a fruit orchard,
Okay.
peaches, pears, and apples mainly. You know,
Nice.
few other crops. And our organic farm is only half an acre, but we can produce 12 to 15,000 pounds of organic produce.
Okay.
So, you
Nice.
know, it's a red letter day. You know, we I think peaked in our squash production, 100 pounds of zucchinis and other summer squash a day. 100
Nice.
and yeah. So, I mean, we're on that scale and we supply, you know, some local markets, restaurants and people and CSAs in Albuquerque and Santa Fe.
Cool. Cool.
Yeah.
Well, that's awesome, Mark. Well, yeah, let's figure out a date to do the second part, and then we can do
Cool.
this again.
Yeah, we'll see what the feedback is of the people who are brave enough to stick through this one.
Yeah, yeah, to watch it. It was fun, and they'll at least stick around the first part.
I know. I'm glad you recorded that early one. I think I'm more entertaining when I think I'm off script.
Yeah, I mean, me too. It's like I like cold starting the podcast. I don't know. It's just it's better for me. If I don't cold start, then sometimes I come on. And I'm like, "Hi, welcome to the pod." You know what I mean? Like I put on a podcast voice. Hi, I'm Scott. Nice to. Here's the evening, the weather in Albuquerque.
So are you you know, you called me a hippie and a communard. Are you a hillbilly?
We don't take too kindly to that talk around here. Now, I wouldn't call
Are
me
you
a.
just are you just a redneck comic?
I'm not a hillbilly. I live in Fredericksburg, Virginia. It's 50 miles south of DC, 50 miles north of Richmond. Right off,
Famous Civil War battle happened there.
yes, several. Chancellorsville, Fredericksburg, Spotsylvania
Yeah.
Courthouse, Lee's Hill. There's a couple. Um,
Well, you said that your grandparents did
they-
bootleg liquor.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, my dad's side of the family, they're classic old school American. My mom's side of the family, they're my mom's second generation. Her parents immigrated from Germany. So yeah. My dad's side of the family, they're a little red in the neck, yeah, a little bit.
My partner for 10 years now is a Garrett. And if you're from New Mexico, you might guess, oh, that Garrett, Sheriff Pat Garrett, he who killed Billy the Kid.
Oh, okay.
So she's the granddaughter of that. So she's kind of a rock star among Western historians. And we've, you know,
Wow.
we've gone down, we haven't actually gone down to Lincoln yet where the main action happened, but down to Roswell. And it's just fascinating to me. I love history because if you look at any historical event, suddenly everything opens up. And when I heard that Billy the Kid and his gang called themselves the Regulators, they're probably on the right side of justice. But unfortunately, they killed too many lawmen
Right.
to not have gone down in bullets and blood. But it's a really fascinating story, and my partner Susanna is a bit conflicted because obviously she's very proud of her granddad and the Garrett tradition and all that. But you know, there was a lot of justice on both sides of it, and what was happening in New Mexico is kind of like hostile takeovers. The Anglos were stealing all the land from both the Hispanics and the indigenous people out here, and all kinds of chicanery was going on. There was a Santa Fe ring. So fascinating history.
That is pretty interesting. My grandma is like second cousins with Pete Rose. So that's my
All right.
bootleggers and Pete Rose.
Time I want to see a tobacco wad in your cheek.
All right, next time I'll have a tobacco wad in my cheek. I promise.
Okay, it's been a blast. So,
yeah, it's been fun, Mark.
Do it up, and hopefully you do get some positive feedback from your couple dozen podcast listeners.
Yeah. We'll get some good feedback from this. Oh, hold on. Before you go, how do you, because hey, it might be a little while before we do this again. How do you think people can take from the biosphere story and apply it to lockdown, quarantine, and the state of social chaos that we're all in with each other? How can we learn to get along? How can we learn from you guys how to get along with each other?
Yeah, okay, we'll get into that hopefully in more depth. There is a lot of tension inside. I think one, eat a lot of food, prepare really great meals for each other. Now I guess you can take, depending on your country, get takeout. I like alcohol myself. Anytime we had a feast or alcoholic beverage, or you're mentioning, we only had coffee from some young rainforest trees that we harvested the beans from. But anytime there was like a special occasion, all those tensions melted away. And I think what really unified us was that everybody understood that we had a common purpose, keeping Biosphere 2 going. It was pretty unlikely. We never expected that we'd actually last for 2 years and to make it as successful as possible. And we also, at a very deep level, understood that this thing is keeping us alive. And,
Right.
the really bad thing that happens is people subconsciously sabotage each other and even their ostensible tasks. So, talking conflict through, we did that a lot. Talk it through, even if it doesn't solve the issue, just put it on the table,
Right.
and, in the fullness of time, we've had Biosphere reunions, people that I really just chemically had a difficult time with, now really, very good friends, because we can look back and say, we really did remarkable stuff, It was
Right.
pretty amazing, the adventure that we were on.
Yeah, I imagine it's quite a bond that you get with somebody after spending 2 years on such a project of such a magnitude, and you all have the same focused intent towards this goal.
Yeah, I sometimes joke that Biosphere 2 is my 2-year monastery, Zen monastery experience. And after Biosphere 2, or no, actually earlier, before I left New York, I had done group therapy, kind of opening up emotionally.
Right.
So, and those encounter groups, group therapy used to be really bare knuckle. So the other thing about living with 7 other people is that they're mirrors to you.
Yeah.
And, you very soon find out the buttons that will get other people going. And it's really difficult to resist pushing those buttons. So I also say that, being inside Biosphere 2, and equally when you're quarantined, even if you love your family, being quarantined is very stressful. It's like you are in this prolonged group therapy marathon.
Right.
And it's gonna force you. What I always thought was, if people find some of my behavior objectionable, I have to live with myself 24/7. So it's a great motivator to use the feedback that you get from people who get irritated with yourself to try to, change.
Right. And better yourself.
Rare. It's rare, but people actually can change for the better.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing is, which I hear is happening, that, people are buying up seeds and starting house plants and little outside gardens, is use this time to really connect with nature that's around you. Even if it's 1 or 2 house plants,
Yeah.
they make them your pets. I love my partner because she will have conversations with insects with plants, with almost anything, with a rock,
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
get in dialogue with the world and
Yeah.
learn to love it.
Yeah.
I think the other thing about saving the planet and all that, I don't think humans are even powerful enough to destroy the planet, but we can certainly mess it up, and we can mess up our own lives big time. And the key to it is fall in love with it. Because once you fall in love with your neighborhood, your community, your neighbors, your family, then you will fight to defend it.
Right. Yeah.
The other problem about just being in your head about the environment, you need to be in your body and in your heart about it. So I
Yeah.
think the quarantine, it's amazing to me, of course you haven't seen Spaceship Earth, but the fact that Spaceship Earth launched and during the COVID and this Life Under Glass, we actually released it on the last Earth Day in April, 2020. And who would know the world that it was released into? So this
Yeah.
could be a point of change.
I hope it is. We have the power to. It's just a matter of wanting to and then following through. And it starts with self. It starts with
Yeah,
self.
totally.
Mark, this has been an amazing conversation. I'm going to stay in touch with you over email. I'm going to look at these emails that you sent me. I'm going to sit here and study and take notes. I only have a 9th grade education, but I will learn ecology by the next time we meet.
Well, my books, by the way, even if they have science, I hate all this academic jargon.
Right.
And I should emphasize, some of the people who did the best and most creative work in my institute were high school dropouts, because they didn't have preconceptions about how things are done.
Right.
That could be, make that your strength, that you haven't been sufficiently indoctrinated.
Thank you. Thank you. You know what? I beat myself up a lot about that shit, and I've never thought to look at it like that. And that's empowering.
Etymology is powerful too.
Yes.
Education, what does educate mean? It means to lead out. So, real education, it doesn't have to happen at a university or with, formal teachers in a classroom. It's really how you lead yourself out and encounter and, appreciate the world. And part of the world, of course, is the literature. You're a theater guy. There's a whole history of theater that you can tap into. But, that's the problem with, if an education turns into a job placement, a social environment to meet your partner, and an indoctrination. I hate people who've taken some science and think that we know everything. The really great scientists, the ones we love to invite to our conferences, are at the top of their field. And they know that as much as they know, there's so much more that we don't know. And they have the passion to investigate it.
Well,
so, yeah.
You're a Buddhist, you know just as well as me, you're never too enlightened to seek enlightenment. And I think the same applies with knowledge, education, with bettering yourself in a craft, whatever it may be.
Yeah. And there's a million, no one is going to learn everything anyway. The thing is to keep that curiosity and the passion for, finding out the stuff that interests you.
Yeah. Yeah. And following through with it. Like that, and that's how I found this. That's how this podcast happened. An article popped up on my homepage, and I was like, wow. I read it, and then I emailed you, and I've been, reading on your page and reading some stuff, and I came up with the questions. But it was like that.
Right.
That science experiment interested me, so I was like, all right, let me follow through. What better way to do that than actually talk to somebody who experienced that? And I think this is important advice for other people out there. Like, I'm not special for getting Mark on my podcast. I just sent him a fucking email. Like, you can do that shit to other people that you're interested in talking to. Just email them. You'd be surprised how many of them respond.
Well, and I'm not special. In fact, I consider myself terminally lucky overall in my life. And the fact that I was selected to go into Biosphere 2, I've talked to a lot of astronauts, and they're pretty real people too. It's like, man, it was a lot of luck that got me up into that spacecraft.
Right.
And a good friend of ours, Rusty Schweikart, he was on Apollo 9, I think, did one of the first spacewalks. But he writes eloquently that he realized it's not because Rusty Schweikart is such a brilliant guy. It wasn't his karma, but he's like this sensing element for all of humanity. And those astronauts, another big thing that happened in the 60s is they started sending back those images of this little amazing marble, this blue and green marble and white in space, in the vastness of space. And that, talk about consciousness changing. Yeah,
Right.
so, hey, we all are little sensing elements of the grand human adventure.
Yep. Yep.
All
Mark,
right, I'm going to sign off now.
yes. You have a good day, sir.
Been really a pleasure,
No,
Scott.
yeah, this has been a lot of fun, Mark. Thank you for doing this, bud. And I'll email you and we'll touch base.
Okay.
All right. Bye.
Adios, amigo.
Yes. Auf Wiedersehen.